Welcome to the Forest of Thought with me, Ingrid Rieser. It's been said that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, the end of this modern, industrialized way of life. So, it seems we need to get better at cultivating imagination in ourselves. But what really is imagination? What does it do? How can communities harness the power of imagination in working to build a more beautiful world? Today, I'm meeting writer and activist Rob Hopkins.
Fundamentally, the point of the book and the point of the work that I do now is that we have to get better as activists at cultivating longing for a different future. Because nothing comes about unless you cultivate longing for it first. And you don't cultivate longing through boring reports and graphs and facts and figures. You cultivate longing through poetry and imagination and storytelling and craft beer and pizza and street art and poetry and ambient music, and that's the bit that we need to get so much better at.
Rob is a writer, activist, gardener, artist, and teacher. In 2005, he helped to plant the first seeds of what would become Transition Towns, a worldwide movement where local communities work to increase their resilience and self-sufficiency. His books include the Transition Handbook and The Power of Just Doing Stuff, and a more recent book on imagination, which we'll be talking about in this episode. I cycled over to Rob's house, and we walked along a small path through the woods, up into a sun-drenched field, and sat there in the grass talking, occasionally interrupted by dog-walking neighbors who stopped to say hello. Little spider here saying hello.
That's good. It's all part of the ecosystem.
It's all part of the ecosystem.
I'll turn my phone off.
Do you want to start by telling us where we're sitting right now?
So we're sitting in a field just on the edge of Dartington Village, which is just near my house. I often walk my dog up here. And from here it has the most beautiful views. I always call it the Buttercup Field because at this time of year it just fills up with buttercups. And during lockdown, I spent a lot of time in here drawing, and I love it. So you can see the Dartington Estate over there. You can see Apricot Farm, our local CSA there, and behind you can see all the way to Haytor on Dartmoor. It's a very lovely place.
It's beautiful.
Especially in the sunshine, like we have today.
Yes, it's beautiful. And so, just to set the scene a little bit, we're in Totnes, or just outside. And several years ago, you and some friends, neighbors, people who also lived here started something that turned into basically a global movement. Could you tell us a bit about that and what it sort of turned into?
So I moved here in 2005. I'd been living in Ireland for about 10 years. I was a permaculture teacher. I was doing stuff in Ireland. The last year I'd been in Ireland, I'd done this project with my students that we called the Kinsale Energy Descent Action Plan, Kinsale being the town I was teaching in. I had just sort of had my kind of climate change dark night of the soul, I guess. and I was thinking, okay, how can we scale up permaculture principles and thinking in response to that? So I asked the students to do this thing where I said, okay, I'd like you to design a pathway that this town could become free of oil dependency within 20 years. And I broke it down. So, right, you two, you can do energy, you two can do education, you can do tourism, whatever it was. And at the end, when they came back with what they'd written, they were so good. I was thinking, we need to do something with this. So with the last little bit of my budget I wrote a little introductory thing and made it into a little booklet. We called it Kinsale Energy Descent Action Plan. And we did an event and we sold some there and we put it online, and then during the time of me moving here I noticed this thing had been downloaded thousands and thousands of times online, and people were going, this is the bit that we've been missing, this is really important. And so I arrived here in Totnes 2005, didn't really know anybody, but I had this sense of there was something in that thing that we did in Kinsale that needs a bit more kind of exploration. So I met with a guy called Naresh Jangrande initially, and he was very interested in these things as well, and we started showing films and giving talks. I started doing a 10-week evening class called Skilling Up for Power Down, which was loosely based on what I was teaching in Ireland. And then within about 2 months, people started to stop us in the street and say, yeah, okay, we get all that stuff now, so what do we do about it? And then it kind of grew, and in September 2006 we did what we called the official unleashing of Transition Town Totnes, which was like the launch event. We expected maybe a couple of hundred people came. There was almost about 400 people, and there were people there from other places as well, which was really interesting, Falmouth and London and Stroud and places, who then went off and started doing transition in their place before we even knew what it was or what we were doing, So then Transition Town Totnes really got going around that time. There was all different projects started, and tree plantings, and the Totnes Pound started, and different things started. And about 6 months on from that, the interest was just snowballing and ridiculous. And it was still basically me and Naresh answering all these emails from like New Zealand and Canada and Brazil, and how do we do this and what is it?
So it was all people who kind of wanted to change things in their community to make it more.
It was people who'd heard about it and who were like, we've been waiting for this. This is the thing, And so then we thought, okay, actually what we need to do is to set up Transition Network as the organisation to support all of this. So we did that the following year, and then now fast forward 15 years. Jesus, is it? I guess it must
14
be.
Maybe.
Oh God, something. Anyway, probably best not to.
Probably best not to specify.
No,
yes.
Need to feel too old.
Yeah.
There's now transition groups in about 50 countries, in thousands of places, and it's really quite an extraordinary thing to observe how it changes and adapts and evolves. And
what kind of things do people do in their transition towns or cities?
So the beautiful thing I think about it is it's not like we sit here in sort of Transition Central like as if it was some kind of Coca-Cola franchise and say, right, now do this. Or it's not like Friends of the Earth where you get sent your pack of what to campaign on this month. It's really, well, what do you want to do? What are you passionate about? What is there energy to do? So I guess, I think one of the things that I've learned is it's really important to celebrate the little things as much as the big things. We could just talk about the big, in inverted commas, successful things by our current economy's standards, and there are lots of those. But also I think the smaller things are just as important. So it can be anything from a community creating a new food garden on its street, as happened in one little neighbourhood in the centre of Brussels, which has been an amazing way of bringing the community and people together, repair cafes, free shops, education events, kind of imagination spaces, up through to community co-housing projects, really ambitious community energy projects. So in Bath, the community energy company there has raised about £15 million of investment from local people and from the local council. In Liège, in Belgium, you've got the Liège Food Belt project, Ceinture Alimentaire Liégeoise, which is reimagining the food system for the whole city in a way that's just phenomenal and blows me away every time I go there. I'm like, oh my God, you're doing what now? And it's now they're working with the municipality to reimagine how the schools and universities and the hospitals procure their food. It's awesome. It's spreading to many other cities now in Belgium, spreading to different cities in France. I was in Marseille, and the mayor recently said we're buying land all around Marseille to grow food as a new way of supplying the schools. Sodexo's contract is ending in 3 years and we're not renewing it. We're building a different model. There's lots of experiments in kind of local economy stuff like local currencies, and here in Totnes we've got the Reconomy Centre, which runs the amazing local entrepreneur forum every year, which sort of it brings in kind of community support and investment into building a new economy. I don't know, I could go on for hours and hours.
Yeah,
it's like,
that's good. That's good just for people who maybe haven't heard of the transition movement. That's good to get a flavour for it.
Yeah.
And I think, what's interesting is seeing how, some people, some friends, some neighbours having an idea, and how that can grow into something totally beyond what one could imagine. And I think the beauty of that is that
so sometimes people say, well, why are communities? Like, surely that's what governments are for. Like, why, particularly in countries where people pay a lot of tax and therefore they just expect everything to be done.
Yeah, it's kind of like in Sweden where I live.
Yeah, I mean, here I guess there's historically more of a kind of an anarchic, self-organising tradition, possibly. But the thing that I see is that what the bit that communities can do is a bit that nobody else could do, because they understand a place in a way that someone coming in from central government with a clipboard and an iPad or whatever just could never do. So communities, I think, can do stuff that governments could never dream of, could never imagine. They can move with an agility that nobody else can, the bigger organisations can. And I think what the transition movement has really done, and that when you do the training, if you do a transition launch training, which is a 2-day training for people who want to start doing transition, it's not like how to print your own money and how to start a community energy company. It's all the kind of invisible stuff. How do you run good groups? How do you run good meetings? How do you manage conflict? How do you make decisions? All of that stuff that is vital to this working and to it all hanging together, but which we somehow, it's like the how we do things matters as much as what we do. And that's really integral to transition, and what we call inner transition as a key part of transition, which is about that aspect of things. How do we work together? How do we learn how to be skillful at that, rather than starting a group and then everyone dashing off in different directions and then all having a big row in 6 months and the whole thing falling apart? That doesn't really serve anybody. And how do we make sure we don't all get burnt out after 6 months of just working too hard? So there's an amazing 2 women, Sophie Banks and Hilary Prentice, who did a lot of work with transition and who developed this idea of inner transition. I remember we had an early meeting in Transition Town Totnes where Sophie looked around the table to everybody and said, okay, we're just going to do a quick go round. So if you carried on working at the pace you're working at now, how long can you sustain that?
Yeah.
And people said, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. Okay, how long do we want this project to last for? 10 years, 20 years. Okay. So something needs to shift somewhere, because that's not going to work, is it? Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
It's a good reminder. Well, and I loved the way that you summarized that previously, which is that if we wait for governments to do what's needed, then it's too late. And if we each do it as individuals, it'll be too little. And if we do it together as communities, it
might just be enough. It might just be in time.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a lovely way to put it. Your latest book is called From What Is to What If.
It is.
Unleashing the Power of Imagination to Create the Future We Want. And it's really nice because one of the things that I try to do quite a bit in this podcast is to take something, a concept or an idea or a word that we think we know what it means, and then try to, unsettle those assumptions a little bit. And I think that your book really does that for the idea of imagination. So, but could you just start by saying something about why did you write a book about imagination?
That's a really good question. I actually had this really interesting, before I wrote it, this period of this sort of 6-month period of self-doubt, of thinking, is anyone going to want to, is that actually a good idea? Is anyone actually going to be interested in a book about imagination? So I spoke to quite a few people who I really respect, and they all said, yeah, it's a great idea. Right? So I was like, okay. It came about because I kept reading people who I really admire, like Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein and Amitav Ghosh, and people who would, and this sentence kept popping up in things. They'd say, climate change is a failure of the imagination. David Wallace Wells put it in his book, The Uninhabitable Earth, as well. It kept coming at me from different directions. And I thought, it's interesting. But by the time I'm there going, oh, what did you mean by that? They were off talking about something else. And I was left there with this thing going, what? Like why would that be a thing? And how would we know? And then it kind of set me off on this process of kind of inquiry, really, of thinking, okay, clearly climate change demands that we reimagine everything. because everything at the moment doesn't work for that. I found this really interesting research published in 2010 which suggested that imagination and IQ had risen together till the mid-90s, at which point IQ kept rising and imagination had started to decline and has been in decline ever since. And in that research, the researcher says that's due to the decline of play in our society. It's due to the rise of testing in schools and due to the rise of screens in our lives. I think there's more to it than that, which I then go into in the book. But it felt to me like you can't build something if you can't imagine it first. And if our collective capacity to be imaginative is declining, at a time in history that demands us to be at our most imaginative, then we've got a real problem on our hands. So I interviewed more than 100 people, most of whom I didn't know before I started, and I learned so much and just read everything I could. And so I guess I came to a place of thinking that we live in a culture and an economy which has created a kind of a perfect storm of factors that are deeply damaging to our collective imagination at the worst possible time in history to have done that. And so I tried to pull together the best examples I could find of places that were really valuing imagination and putting it back in the heart of activism, in the heart of government, in the heart of whatever. What it calls for really is what people now are starting to call imagination infrastructure. We need to build an imagination infrastructure. We recognise if there's a war, we need to build an infrastructure to build planes and ships or whatever it is. And we don't think like that about imagination. We think it's something that kids do. And actually even kids were a bit suspicious of it when kids get too imaginative too. The imagination is kind of distrusted. It's a bit naughty and mischievous and kind of impish, and it's not like creativity. They're often used interchangeably, but creativity, Ursula Le Guin has this beautiful quote about how capitalism has basically co-opted creativity, and it's now used for the creation of more things that people can sell, and innovation is even worse. But she says, they can't have imagination. Imagination is ours. It's the. I always like to try and talk about the difference between innovation and imagination by talking about pizza, in terms of saying, you don't need to reimagine pizza because pizza's amazing and everyone loves pizza. You can innovate with pizza. You can change the cheeses or change the toppings or the kind of dough that you make or whatever. But it would be ridiculous to reimagine pizza. That would be madness. Right. But growth-based neoliberal economics is not like pizza. When it's driving you off a cliff at a great pace, you can't innovate with it. You have to reimagine it. And so the capacity to be imaginative and really ask big, bold what-if questions is fundamental to our survival, I think.
So you mentioned some things already, but what is it that's preventing us from really being more imaginative?
I think there's a guy who I interviewed called Henry Giroux. He wrote this article. He had this sentence that jumped out at me where he talked about the Trump disimagination machine. And this idea that we live surrounded by these factors that are really damaging to our imagination. So, we know that the more unequal a society becomes, then the harder it is for people to reimagine it. It becomes like that we know that cortisol and anxiety and trauma and stress are deeply damaging to the part of our brain where the imagination comes from. And we've created this sort of austerity-based economics which puts so many people into this state of kind of fight or flight, and that makes it really hard for people to be imaginative.
So if we're stressed and scared and so on, then we're not so capable.
Yeah, so the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain where your imagination comes from, people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, the hippocampus shrinks by up to 20%. And when that happens, you lose the ability to think about the future in hopeful, positive ways. You just get stuck in the present and stuck in the past, I think we have an education system that has largely designed imagination out of itself completely, at all levels. We carry these highly addictive devices around in our pocket that devour the time when we should otherwise be being imaginative. 20 years ago, we might have gone for a walk or had a daydreamy walk in the forest and written a poem or something. Now we think, I'll just check my Facebook. I always say to people...
Or we might have been bored as well.
Or we might have been bored, and boredom is great.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for a boring childhood, actually, because I learned how to entertain myself. I always like, when I do talks, I always say, imagine you're in Arles in 1888 in the Yellow House on Place Lamartine, and Vincent van Gogh comes in with a bunch of sunflowers he's just got in the market, and he arranges them in a little pot on the table and sits back and looks at them and then thinks, I'll just check my Instagram and my Twitter and my Facebook and my whatever, and 2 hours later he's watching skateboarding videos on YouTube and he can't remember why he even started watching them. Then he wouldn't have painted any of those amazing paintings that have transformed people's lives for decades. How many great ideas that could transform this time we're living through just don't get anywhere because we reach for our phone instead of going for a walk. So there's lots of different things. Do we spend less time in nature? I think living in a time where that the diversity of the natural world is declining has an impact on the imagination. René Dubos, who is a microbiologist, used to say if we lived on the moon, our imagination would be as barren as the moon. And I think if you live in a world where that we're losing 150 species off this planet every day, that also has an impact on the imagination. And people are time poor and stressed, and education doesn't give us the tools, really. Doesn't value it. Imagination is something you should have grown out of by the time you're 7, really, is I think how our society sees it. Unless you're working for a big tech company, in which case your imagination is kind of harnessed to accelerate the demise of everything. And that's really not great. Yeah.
So those are the things preventing us. And then in the book, I guess you explore some, in that case, what could we be doing, and examples of people who are doing things to help improve
I think the
our
first
capacity.
thing is, there's a few things. The first thing is we have to recognise imagination needs space. So in our own lives, in our organisations, there's no way the Department of Transport is going to come up with strategies for car-free cities if they don't intentionally make the space to have that conversation. It's not going to happen by accident. We have to make the space in our organisations, in our movements. It's like XR and I think Transition have been good at creating space within their movements for those kind of conversations. But if you speak to people who work in big organisations, local government, businesses, you're just flat out trying to sustain things as they are, unless you create the space to say, this is not working, then you're just going to keep going. And as individuals, we all know that our best ideas come when we have space. Albert Einstein always said his best ideas came when he rode his bike in the forest. J.K. Rowling dreamt up the whole Harry Potter story on a long train journey from Glasgow to London, looking out the window. It's like that space is vital. So, and we can create that space as communities, is what Transition does. Create those big sort of what-if events where people get together and think about the future in different ways. I think we need places. We need places that can model and demonstrate and show what that future would be like, so people can meet it and smell it and taste it and interact with it. And that can be tiny things like a little forest garden on a street, up to like whole towns, whole cities. Ungersheim in France, amazing example of transition in action. We've all had places that we've been to, and afterwards we've come home and looked at the place we've come from with new eyes and seen its possibilities in new ways. They can be urban farms, rooftop gardens, social economy projects, all sorts of stuff. We need more of those. We need practices, so the things we do together. So when I do workshops and trainings with groups, it's like, how do you teach people to play again? How do you build a culture where people can meet suggestions with a yes and rather than a yes but? How do you help adults to feel like it's okay to be vulnerable and a bit silly? I think the main thing that I wanted to do with the book was to put it in the middle of the table and have a conversation about it.
I think, several things. I think it's interesting. One of the things we talk about in the book is how we sort of need to be able to imagine where we want to go to in order for that to happen. and having myself taking part in various sort of, scenario workshops, for example, where like, what would sustainable Uppsala look like in 20 years or something? And then you're sort of thinking, oh, I don't know, some windmills maybe, but that's not totally good either. Certainly less cars on the road, etc. And you end up sort of, my feeling coming away from those things is that we really haven't, what we've come up with is so poor compared to what the future could be. It's funny how sometimes those exercises designed to engage that excitement about a possibility sometimes aren't very effective. So what do you think is needed for those kinds of, that kind of dreaming and that kind of envisioning and that kind of imaginative practice to actually be extra fruitful? You see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was part of an amazing thing that happened about 2 years ago, this sort of thing called the New Constellations, which was this new kind of approach that they were trialling, and they did it for Barrow-in-Furness, which is up just north of Liverpool, which is a pretty tough place where they build nuclear submarines. They basically have an economy that exports death around the world, really, and it's quite a tricky place. And this was a process that was designed as a week-long, I think, process, which was about creating a new North Star. And they used this narrative of it being like, okay, if you want to set off on a journey, what's the first thing you do? You have to get your boat together. You need what you need to sustain you. You need who are the people going to be in the boat. And they chose 20 people from across the society who represented lots of different sectors. And so it was started with, what do you love about this place? What are your fears about this place? And it was beautifully facilitated. And my role in it was to be like, they called me the salty sea dog. So I was like the sort of old sailor kind of guy who you'd meet down at the pub on the harbour, who'd been, at sea all his life, who brought back stories from places he'd been to, So my role was to come in and say like, well, in Berlin they're doing this, and in Amsterdam they're doing this, and in Totnes we did this, and to bring in those kind of stories that open you out from beyond. We could have some windmills and less cars, and it was such a beautiful process. And they came up with all sorts of great stuff, way beyond that. And I was on an event once with this Brazilian urbanist, who said that she often finds the same problem. She's like working with communities. So, look, we've got this whole public square here. We can reimagine it. What should we do? And people are like, another bench? And she's like, or free chocolate.
Nice one.
Like, oh, yeah, free chocolate. So it's like it has to be part of a process where you're really stretching people and opening up that sense of we could do anything. We could have free chocolate. We could have a chocolate river running through the middle of this. We could. You don't just go straight into imagine what it would be like. There's stuff that needs to come before then.
There needs to be a sort of a warming up and priming of the imaginative muscle. So
yes, exactly. Because our imagination muscle should be all sort of muscly like that, and it's actually all sort of floppy and flaccid like that. And so it needs some work. We need to learn again how to do that. And there's lots of exercises for doing that.
In your book, there was someone also speaking about what the what if questions need if they're going to be sort of effective and really elicit a response. Maybe you could say something about that.
Yeah, I can't remember what they were.
I think I'll tell you my notes.
Yes, do.
So what it was that the question needs to be asked with real curiosity. So not like your example with these consultations where the question of what should we do with this place is not really asked.
It has to be genuine. You have to be genuinely curious, I think, is the thing.
And that it needs to be answerable in many different ways.
Yeah. That
there has to be some sort of limits to it as well. So maybe not asking how do we change the whole world, but more what do we want to do with this square in our city, and then something about it providing a glimpse of something else that you can step into. So something that...
Yeah, I always think it's a bit like in Alice in Wonderland, where she's too big to fit through the gate into the garden, but she can see the garden and she really wants to get there, but she can't. And there's a lovely quote in there as well by Antanas Mokas, who was the mayor of Bogota, this extraordinary mayor of Bogota, who said something like, a good what-if question is like writing the first half of a really audacious sentence on a blackboard and respecting people's ability to answer. It should make you really curious, and it should give you a taste of something different. And the thing that when I do workshops, it's like I always have to say to people, coming back to your thing about, well, we could have a windmill. People very easily lapse into real general stuff that actually we can't affect. What if everybody loved each other?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, can we get a bit more specific then? What if the whole world was vegan? Yeah, okay. Can we ground that into this place, into this spot? What if this organisation went vegan? That would be interesting. Yeah, and what I find is then if before that I always teach people this exercise from improv about the difference between yes but and yes and. So yes but is like, you put people into pairs and you give them a scenario. You say, okay, you're planning a picnic. You're going to go on a picnic together, and you're going to take it in turns making suggestions. And the role of the other person in this first round is to just shut down your idea with just shut it down. Oh, we could take some champagne. I hate champagne. It makes me sick. Awful shit. I can't bear it. Okay. And then the other person would say, oh, I'll bring some cheese. Oh, I can't. No, not cheese. I'm allergic to cheese. It brings me out in spot. And then the second round, you do it where one of you again, you make suggestions. You're going on a picnic, and the other role of the other person is to accept your idea but with no enthusiasm. So, I'll bring some champagne. Well, I mean, you could, I suppose, but you'll be on your own really. And then the last round, you do it where you take the other person's idea and you yes and it, so you build on it. So I'll bring some champagne. Great. I'll bring some glasses my grandmother gave me. Oh wow, beautiful. And then we could open a little shop selling glasses. Yes, and then we could do, and you go backwards and forwards and you create this whole ridiculous scenario that is only able to exist because you accepted each other's response. Because also often as activists, you just come up against yes but all the time. Yes, but it's too late. Yes, but nobody cares. Yes, but there's no money. Yes, we tried that before and it didn't work. Yes, but yes, but yes, but yes, but. It's just the bane of any activist's life is just yes, but all the time. But when you bring in yes and you send people off to just come up with loads of what if questions and to respond with yes and, it's like puts people almost into a kind of altered state of consciousness. It's quite incredible. So yeah, that's a really important thing to do first, I think. Yeah,
and maybe because it's like you said, maybe that puts you in a different, completely different state of thinking where you don't know what's going to appear. But it also makes me think of, myself on, say, New Year's Day with like maybe some New Year's resolutions. This year, I'm going to meditate every day and go for a run every afternoon. And I'm also going to be much better about keeping in touch with my relatives and etc. And then you just sort of realize that within the context of my life, that's just not going to happen, and that you end up also being disappointed perhaps. I had all these ideas and then it didn't work out, but maybe something else could happen. So maybe it's about that you're open to trying things. But I think how do you find the balance between the total expansiveness of yes within the limits and context of where things happen?
I think one of the things when you write a book about imagination is everyone says, oh, so what are you doing? Oh, I'm writing a book about imagination. Oh, like everybody you meet is like, oh, have you read this? It's like, oh, geez, I've got a pile of stuff to read like this. And one of the things about 2 weeks before I finished writing it, someone said to me, oh, have you heard of a civic imagination office in Bologna?
Oh, wow. I
was like, no. So I had 2 weeks to find out everything that I could about it and find the guy who would set it up and speak to him. And what I love about that was it was a thing that was set up in about 2013, 2014 in Bologna, because they saw that people were really disengaging from local democracy and political processes and stuff. So they started this thing called the Civic Imagination Office, where they opened 6 laboratories around the city, where they would run big sort of visioning, open space, kind of World Cafe type things. And then when people would come up with a good idea, the municipality would sit with them and say, that's a good idea. Let's make that happen. We can offer this and this, and you can offer that and that. Good, let's make a pact. So they've made 500 pacts in the last few years in Bologna between the municipality and the people. And what I love about it is that it kind of meets the imagination in the middle. It invites people to be imaginative, but then it says, okay, let's actually do that. Because there's only a certain number of times you can invite people. It's like, I see it with my kids. There was the rise of Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, which was the first time that whole generation had felt optimistic about politics, that really reflected them, and a kind of politics that was that they got excited about. And young people, like hundreds of thousands of young people getting involved, joining the Labour Party. This is great, exciting, finally. And the Fridays for Future as well, that opened up that space of like, well, maybe. And then it's just like shut down with kind of, no, can't do that. Come on, be realistic. And it's like there's only a certain amount of times people can, after a while you just go, fuck it, what's the point? Why would I?
So you don't want to waste, you don't want to waste the chance of making something imaginative, come to fruition.
Exactly. Whereas actually, if you can design it's like with here in Totnes, I'm part of a thing called Atmos, which is the most ambitious community-led development project in the country, which is currently in a big battle with deeply unscrupulous landowners to try and get the site which they stole from us at the last minute, to try and get it back into community ownership. We did a consultation for that on an old factory, 8-acre factory site. Normally those consultations are just like, well, we've designed this, what do you think? We started with a genuinely blank slate and said anything could happen here. There's this building here, it's a listed building, we can't knock that down, we need to do something with that. Apart from that, everything's going to go, and it's a blank slate. What do you think? And in a town of 8,500 people, 4,000 people contributed ideas to that consultation and designed something extraordinary based on what the town needed, and went through round after round of going back to the community and going, kind of like this. And they go, yeah, but with a bit more of that and less of that. Okay, like this? Yeah, And I've never seen anything like that. That sort of thing of, well, you imagined it and now it's going to happen. That's what we need, I think, yeah.
The other interesting thing is how you get to beneath all of the sort of layers of maybe what we think that we want to what it is that we're actually looking for, the feeling of what we're actually looking for. So if we say that we want less petrol-driven cars, maybe that's something that we want, but what we actually want is a transport system that doesn't contribute to climate change, that isn't polluting and causing problem for people's lungs, vehicles that aren't dangerous to people, more space for other things, vehicles that aren't so loud. We want ways to get around our communities that would make that possible. And then beneath that again, it's like, well, the feeling that we're looking for is maybe, the opportunity to move freely in our communities and meet with friends, be with family. Maybe one of the reasons that we get stuck on and can't be so imaginative is because we think that we forget to think of the deepest level, what it is that we're really searching for. And when we go that deep, there's maybe much more possibilities for how we could get there, in a way.
Yeah, there's a beautiful story that's in the book from an interview I did with a guy whose name I can't remember now. That's what happens when you write a book. You're so in it, and then you move beyond and you can't remember anything.
Yeah.
And he does work about imagination and about dreamings with different organisations. And he did some work with a group of mothers in America, mothers of incarcerated children. So in America, kids as young as 11 can be sent to prison. Can you imagine? Like adult prison. And when that happens, often it's very hard for parents and families to get access to their kids. They kind of disappear behind the sort of bureaucracy of the prison. It's very hard for them to get access. And so he did this work with this group of mums of kids in this kind of situation. And he said, okay, so what would success look like? And they said, well, it would look like the passing of this particular bill, 3725, in Congress. Okay, so imagine that's happened. Now what does success look like? Oh, well, it would look like this. Okay, imagine that's okay, and kept going like that. What would success look like? What would success look like? And got them to a point where they said, success smells like waffles cooking in a kitchen, because that's what a happy family smells like, and that's what ultimately this is all about. you know. And he was like, okay, well, that's good. That's where we start. Because we often think of imagination as being about images. Is visual, but actually the imagination is multi-sensory. It's about smells and tastes and sounds, and so I do an exercise when I do the time machine exercise with people. I always say to people, I've built this time machine, and I take it with me when I do talks. And every episode of the podcast, I ask my two guests to step into the time machine, and we're going to travel to 2030. That's not a dystopia, and it's not a utopia. It's the result of us having done everything we could possibly have done during that time. So it was the most phenomenal time of change in history. Felt unimaginable in 2022, but it built and it built and it built, and you're going to step out into that world and to explore it with all your senses. Like, what does it smell like? What does it taste like? What do you hear? What do you feel? And I've done that with 10 people in a workshop, and I've done it with 1,500 people in a hall in Brussels, and it's amazing. And a lot of the time people actually find that it's like things they didn't expect. You know, they were like, well, I expected that was just going to be like electric cars everywhere or something. You know, but actually I really didn't expect that. And it's the subtle kind of detail of it that is just beautiful. Like the poet Rilke had this beautiful thing. He used to say, the future must enter into you a long time before it happens. Isn't that beautiful? The future must enter into you a long time before it happens. And I think often as climate activists, we don't think about doing that. We've forgotten how to do that. It's all about like, no, I have to convince you that my argument is a right argument. And as a couple of years ago when there was the Black Lives Matter protests in America, I saw this T-shirt that someone was wearing that said, I've been to the future, we won. That's so beautiful. Gave me goosebumps. I thought, you know, what if we were a lot more kind of, you know, that we did that kind of time machine travel thing, you know, regularly. We stepped into that future and really familiarised ourselves with that future that we long for and really care about. And then we talk to people about it in that way. I've been there. It's amazing. You're going to love it. Let me tell you about it. You know, so then it becomes much more kind of embodied and playful rather than all just being very kind of intellectual.
It was interesting when you were talking about the project where they had used the North Star as a kind of image, because I think that the future can be more fantastical, mysterious, magical than we can even imagine from where we are now, but that we need to get our compass direction right. So we do need to find our North Star, and it can be good to have some specific ideas about places where we might go along the way, and in order to make that happen. But also, I think that things can, as long as the direction stays true, things can also evolve and come into being and manifest themselves in ways that are unimaginable to me at the moment.
Totally. I mean, I'm involved with the new Lion Brewery, which is...
it's a wonderful place.
Wonderful place.
Yes, I love it.
The UK's first 100% community-owned brewery, which is just over there.
Yeah.
And which I've been involved with since the beginning. And one of the things, you know, the way it is now is amazing. It's not how we visioned it.
Right.
You know, we had like 3 years ago, we had this whole big
And
vision.
the way it is now, for people who haven't been there, it's a lovely brewery where they also serve beer, and it's next to a pizza place, and it's all on by a playground, and there's a pool right next to it.
Yeah, which wasn't the original idea. Was we were going to be moving it into the same building as the Arm and Thief Bakery, and having a mill and a bakery and a brewery in the same building, and the whole place as a kind of shared eating experience, and that was the vision that sustained us for a couple of years, and actually for various complicated, boring reasons it just didn't end up happening. But yeah, you adapt and evolve as well. But it's like the vision helps you to take the next step, and it's always evolving and changing. Yeah, if you get stuck with a vision that no, we can't do that because that's not in the vision, then you stop being kind of playful and imaginative with it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wonder if also people feel that it's almost being optimistic about the future, or feeling that there's possibility, or that things might turn out all right, that's that's somehow disrespectful of sort of, you're not really taking in how bad things are in the world right now, if you think that. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I can imagine
get that quite a lot. Yeah.
I can imagine people saying that too, and that this maybe blocks people from thinking that, well, the future could be quite wonderful in ways that we haven't imagined yet.
I think the thing that I get is more that sort of, if you suggest that anything other than collapse and catastrophe is the only thing that's on offer, that you're somehow selling people what they call hopium, this sort of, and that.
Well, I've been sold hopium, or people have tried to sell it to me. You see people, maybe politicians or business leaders who are kind of saying, well, we'll just do this, put some more money here.
A hydrogen economy.
Exactly, hydrogen economy.
With carbon capture and storage.
And so I think people are very sensitive to the hopium. So that's understandable.
I feel like the stuff that... I feel like we know climate change is a war of the wealthy against the not wealthy. 50% of climate emissions are made by the wealthiest 10% of people, and within that, the wealthiest 1% are a huge percentage. Climate change is not being caused by the poorest people in the world; it's being caused by the richest people in the world. And the people in positions of power and oil and gas companies and all the obnoxious organisations who are basically just sort of, who can't imagine anything other than themselves just carrying on forever, we know who they all are, and it's like, I refuse to give those people the gift of my resignation and my pessimism. It's just not going to happen. Sorry, you don't get to win like that just by grinding us all into submission. I see it so much in this country at the moment, where we have the most disgraceful, incompetent, rubbish Prime Minister we ever had. The latest in a series of them just getting worse and worse, but this one is particularly awful, who keeps saying all the time, Wes, we have to get on with the important work that we've got to do. Like, what important work have you got to do? You're not doing anything that makes it anything better for anyone apart from the people who funded you to get into government. And when I look at the movements in the world who inspire me most and who really keep alive possibilities of change. I read a lot of stuff at the moment by young black women writers and activists from the US, Adrienne Marie Brown, Walida Imarisha, Mariame Kaba, people like this who are just phenomenal and who are putting imagination completely at the heart of what they do. And movements like the prison abolition movement in America, which I think is extraordinary, that there's a movement that keeps alive that question, what if there were no prisons, and has done for decades and decades, and uses that as a what if question to unlock all those conversations about funding and education and poverty and mental health and stuff like that. And I think, well, if they can do it, why would we not be doing it here? Mm. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Fundamentally, the point of the book and the point of the work that I do now is that we have to get better as activists at cultivating longing for a different future. Because nothing comes about unless you cultivate longing for it first. And you don't cultivate longing through boring reports and graphs and facts and figures. You cultivate longing through poetry and imagination and storytelling and craft beer and pizza and nice hillsides in Dartington with nice views of Haytor and street art and poetry and ambient music, and that's the bit that we need to get so much better at. It's really easy to really bum people out with depressing information. It's really easy. Have you people that's what it's, and there is a little sort of slight smug thing that comes with it, that I'm the person who's telling you this news because I've done the research, and you're going to hate to hear this, but I really should tell you. It's much harder to sit with somebody and to hear where they're at and what moves them, and to try and cultivate longing in them for a different kind of a future. But that's the work we have to do, I think.
It feels like you've been doing this work for a long time now. And I'm sure there must be times where you also feel, or you say that in the book as well, that there are times when you also feel despair.
Of course.
Yeah. And I think we all feel a bit lost sometimes, wonder what it is that we should be spending our time doing in this time. So what do you have, what do you do when you're in those periods?
I think I remind myself that actually experiencing eco-anxiety just really means you have a pulse and you care about other people. It's like the people who don't experience eco-anxiety, I think, are the ones we need to really worry about. I feel like those moments of grief and despair about what's happening and what's being lost are a really important part of staying well in this time. But if we get stuck there, that's not great. So there's a kind of a healthy cycle of sort of grief and despair, and then doing something, and seeking out stories that inspire us to do things, and then we will always kind of go back into that, because it will go back into the grief bit, because that's the world that we're in, and this is a world that continually gives us things to be like, oh my god, because we're run by mad people and psychopaths.
It's like you say in the book, if trauma is one of the things that makes people less imaginative, and everyone who's in like the top positions in the UK government went to boarding school and were not allowed to be with their parents or really have any free play when they were young, then maybe it's not a good...
we're governed by terrified, traumatized 8-year-olds, basically.
Yes.
And who've been put through a system of education that means that you can put other traumatized people on airplanes and send them to Rwanda and somehow feeling like you're doing a good thing, Aldo Leopold, who was one of the first great sort of ecologists, people who was called an ecologist, he said something like, to live in a world of ecological understanding is to live in a world of wounds, or something. It's it's really hard to kind of live a sort of what people call a normal life when all you want to do is run around screaming at everybody, going, go. It's like that Don't Look Up film. You just feel like those scientists. I watched that Don't Look Up film thinking, yeah, that's kind of what it's like. But at the same time, the thing that kind of really sustains me is I think human civilization's an incredible thing. I'm not one of those people who's like, actually, I think the world would be just better off if we all just disappeared. Yes, we can do lots of shitty things, but I think most people are basically decent and good. And we created the pyramids, and Nina Simone, and Van Gogh, and Rembrandt, and Virginia Woolf. Do you know what I mean? It's like actually human beings are capable of so much better. Yeah, and I think the thing with, I love Joanna Macy. She's a kind of a soul sister, and an incredible. She's amazing, and the grief work that she does is really important. But I think sometimes there's a risk. I remember seeing she does that fantastic exercise where you sit in a pair with somebody and you say, when I think about the collapse of the world's climate, I feel, and you go into the kind of the grief around that, and it's really important. And it's work of extraordinary compassion, and it's beautiful. But I always feel like she misses the one question, which is, when I feel that I'm part of the most extraordinary transformative movement in the history of this planet that turned things around in time, I feel. Because if we don't make space for that question, then it's just not going to happen. We have to keep that possibility open, I think, while we grieve, while we do the work that we have to do, while we get our hands dirty, while we do all of that stuff. Unless we keep that possibility open, and we just sink into despair, then we're not really of service to anybody, really. Hey, Matt.
Hey.
That it's the...
You say hello to me.
Hello.
Now owe the dog.
Hello.
Apparently.
You can get
Hello.
sniff into the microphone there, look.
You're so cute. Hi. Can I say hello? Oh, yes.
I have some questions prepared for you.
It's great. It's great.
Cheers, Matt.
We're a natural part of nature. We just occur.
Of course, it's Homo sapiens and
yeah, exactly.
a companion. Wonderful.
Nice to see you.
See you later.
So, what would you say to people who are sitting at home and listening to this?
I'd say, well done for lasting this long.
Yeah, well
Thank you,
done.
I'm amazed. In a world where everyone's attention spans are shot to shit, you've made it this far. Congratulations.
I agree with that. Apart from that, people sitting at home and feeling like, well, you know, maybe there is something that I could do, but I don't know where to start. I don't know maybe anyone in my community who's interested in these things, and maybe it won't end up resulting in anything at all. What do you say to people?
I'd say, well, you might be right, but you're never going to know that. If you try really hard for about 3 or 4 years, give it a good go, and then come back to me and say it doesn't work, then that's different than just deciding that from the beginning. I think I would say there are people near you who care about this too.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, wherever you are. I remember we had a woman once who got in touch with the Transition Network, and she lived in Australia. She said, I love transition, I'm so excited about it, but in my town I'm the only person who cares about transition. And we said, are you? Are you though? How do you know that? Are you sure? Yes, oh yes. Anyway, then a couple of months later she got back in touch and said, I put an advert in my local newspaper, see if anyone else was interested in transition. I got 140 replies, and now we've got a transition group, and it's fantastic. So you know, there will be people, and I always think all of us have a limited amount of spare time, right? Once after we've fed our kids and gone to school and done work or whatever it is we have to do, and had some downtime and done whatever else it is that sustains us and paid the mortgage or whatever, we have a limited amount of time that we can dedicate. Very few of us could be like 24/7 transition climate people, so we have to ration and make best use of that time. My sense is there's no point investing that time in trying to convince people that you're right, people who are like cynical. Just don't bother. It's like almost never. I've engaged climate denying people on Twitter for years. I've never convinced one of them. Maybe one of them said, oh, I'll go and read a book. And I said, yes, I think that would probably be a good idea. But apart from that, it's a total waste of time. It's much better to find some people, even if it's just 1 or 2 people where you live, who care about this and who are passionate about it. Learn some of the tools that we know work, like some of the stuff in the transition training. You can download at transitionnetwork.org. You can download a thing called the Essential Guide to Doing Transition, which is in about 15 different languages on there, which is everything you need to know in order to get started. And just start and see. Find something that you're all passionate about. So if you're all really passionate about local food, there's no point in trying to start a community energy company. You know, find the thing that you're like, yes, we could do that. And try and do a couple of things early that give you a good early win. We're going to meet next Saturday. We're going to plant 30 trees. You bring the spades, I'll buy the trees, you bring the sandwiches. Good, okay. And then you meet and then you do it. And then that gives you a sense of, ooh, well, we did that. What else could we do? Because I think really often we imagine that somehow there's loads and loads of people who don't know anything about climate change and so aren't doing anything. And then there's people who are really passionate about it and who are giving all of their time and energy to it. And that somehow if we could magically show someone a sufficiently depressing DVD, they magically jump from the not doing anything to the really engaged bit. And it doesn't work like that. It's like people take little steps in, and with each little step in, they feel like, ooh, I now know all these people I didn't know before, and this feels really good. Maybe I'll take another step. So we have to do those steps. But I've never met anybody who has said, you know, my life was doing all right until I got involved in transition, and then it was just downhill all the way. Or, you know, I hate knowing all these extra people, and I hate knowing all these things that I know. You know, take a step in with what feels manageable, and enjoy it, and stop regularly to celebrate, because that's what minimises the risk of burnout in doing all of this as well, I think. And share your stories. This is now a movement in 50 countries around the world. You don't have to pay anything to become a formal transition group. All the resources are available for free, but the commitment is that you share your stories. And so transition, if it's one thing, it's it's a movement of stories all around the world. So add your stories into those.
Is there anything, there's lots of things we could keep talking about, but is there anything that comes to mind that you think we could have mentioned?
Yeah, I guess just one little thing, which is I read a book recently by someone called Jane McGonigal, who writes about futures and helping people to get better at imagining the future. Because we get so used to this idea that change only happens in little steps. And even though we saw during COVID that was total bollocks and always was total bollocks, and that actually things can change really quickly and governments can find funds. And she has this beautiful bit, which is things that have changed within 10 years. So she says it took 10 years from Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat to the civil rights legislation being passed in America. It took 10 years from the first international sanctions on South Africa to the new constitution in South Africa. It took 10 years from the first iPhone being released to more than half the people in the world having a smartphone. It took 10 years from Bitcoin just being an idea that some students had in a bedroom to being worth $1 trillion for the first time. It's like those 10-year, and there's loads, she has a whole list of them, Why would we choose at this time in history to think that things can't be radically transformed within the next 10 years? And in fact, we know that that's going to happen either way. If we don't do anything, the world is going to be radically transformed to the degree where 1 billion people by 2030 are going to need to move. Where the hell are they going to go? The major food grain baskets in the world are going to collapse. So we know that whichever way we move, there's going to be change, and it could either be horrible, or we could actually use this as the opportunity to really reimagine everything. So it's like I always, when I do my time machine exercise with people, I always start by telling them, 10 years, a lot can happen in 10 years. Here's an example. Why don't we work on that assumption that 10 years from now, people will add us to that list of things that could change within 10 years. I always say to people that we should do the work that we do, kind of feeling the hand of history at the small of our back. I went to Marseille recently, and they've just started Marseille en Transition, and they have this big open space event, hundreds of people, really well facilitated open space, trying to think of ideas for the future of Marseille. And I said, you should imagine that in 10 years from now, they'll put a plaque up on the wall outside this building and say, there was this amazing event that happened 10 years ago, which kicked off this whole process, which transformed this city. And if we do the work that we do with that sense that that's the level that we're working at, and that's the impact that we're going to have, I think that's really powerful.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you, Field.
My pleasure. Well, thank you for coming to join me in this beautiful spot.
Thanks.
If you come here in the evening, when the sun gets low, you just see all the insects. It's like almost like it's snowing with insects. It's just beautiful.
Can imagine it's beautiful.
Yeah.
We didn't really talk about it here, but Rob is also an amazing artist. If you follow him on social media, you'll see some of the marvelous drawings and prints that he makes. He also hosts a podcast that's called From What If to What Next, where he and his wide range of guests hop on a time machine to 2030 and see what they find there. As always, you'll find links to the things we talked about in the show notes or on the website, forestofthought.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting us on Patreon, which is at patreon.com/forestofthought. But even more importantly, please share this episode with your friends, family, or colleagues, and that's really how the podcast gets around. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.